Hey everybody, and welcome to another Tausken review. Today I'll be taking a look at Remnant from the Ashes. Remnant is a pretty interesting game that blends Dark Souls mechanics with looter shooter gameplay and RPG elements. The overall gameplay flow is very similar to a Dark Souls game. You teleport from your starting area to somewhere in the world, forge off, fight monsters, bosses, and things, until you eventually find a bonfire-like object from Dark Souls and teleport yourself back to the camp where you can replenish your ammo, health, get upgrades, and so forth. Where Remnant really shines is in its unique mix of looter shooter gameplay with the Souls mechanics. At the beginning you choose one of 3 classes, but your choice really ultimately doesn't matter. It just decides what starting abilities, weapons, armor you start with. From there you forge out and fight monsters to collect scrap, which can be used to purchase new weapons, armor, abilities, or upgrade your existing equipment to be more powerful, much like a Dark Souls game. The weapon and equipment diversity is pretty strong in Remnant. There's all sorts of unique weapons, from simple Tommy guns, rifles, shotguns, pistols, to more interesting things that you can get from bosses, like an energy beam, or pistols that shoot out poison that damages people over time, or crossbows or grenade launchers, and more. Armor can also be completed in sets to gain different bonuses, and together you can really combine all of these with the jewelry system for things like rings, necklaces, and stuff that give bonuses towards XP, resistances, different damage types, and this literally lets you combine and customize your character in unique ways, and really give you a lot of freedom to build your character in the way that you want. If you want to play as more of a poison character, you can. If you want to be a flame character, you can. If you want to be more melee focused, you can. If you want to use your energy beam, you can. There's all sorts of options here. The overall combat itself is pretty fun. You can carry a pistol, a main weapon, and a melee weapon. Because ammo is pretty scarce in this game, you'll oftentimes want to conserve your more powerful weapons or kill enemies as quickly as possible to gain ammunition, which can be used for others. It's a great system that really rewards careful decision making, play, and all that. The difficulty itself is much less punishing than, say, Dark Souls when I compared it. The Remnant gameplay has a much longer iframe for, say, dodging and rolling, and of course being a more ranged-based game rather than mostly melee like in Dark Souls, it has much more freedom in terms of like how you can get away from enemies and avoid them and stuff. So it's definitely a lot easier, but I would still say it's challenging. The enemy design is pretty great. Each world has its own unique types of enemies, from ones that can burrow themselves and move underground, to strange sci-fi like energy guys, to poison guys that will charge you and explode. The bosses do leave a little bit to be desired. I felt like most of them were pretty fun, but there's a couple that I just breezed through or felt like a complete joke in mechanics. But overall, I still really enjoyed the enemy mechanics mostly. Remnant also adds quite a bit of replayability, as you won't see everything in one playthrough. When you start a campaign, the game will choose a set of bosses that you'll run into, so you won't run into all of them through the first playthrough. This encourages you to replay through the game, or to use adventure mode, which are kind of like the Rift system in Diablo. It's like a short contained scenario that you'll play through that gives you a random series of bosses and things. And pair this with the late game mechanics of the game, it gives you a lot to do, because once you've beaten the game, there's a ton of new things you can still grind for on newer, harder difficulties. Remnant is around a 7 to 10 hour game. If you crank the difficulty up, it may take a little bit longer, but it's not the longest game. Particularly if you're familiar with Dark Souls mechanics, you might breeze through some of the bosses and challenges. But this isn't really a bad thing because, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of endgame content here, so it's really kind of centered around you get through that, maybe you replay through the game to play the new bosses, or you grind out new content. The story is unfortunately pretty forgettable in Remnant. Basically, some apocalyptic event has happened, and you'll end up traveling between different worlds to stop the chaos, and it's honestly just kind of rather irrelevant. There's no real strong character build-up or world development here, the characters are boring, it's all window dressing for the RPG gameplay. I wasn't drawn in at all. The graphics are pretty well done and detailed. There's some particularly brilliant areas of the game that stuck out wonderfully. Sound is also an area that I felt like was pretty good in Remnant. All the enemies, weapons, abilities have great sound effects that really draws you into the game and give tons of audio cues to the player to listen to. There's tons of bosses where you can just listen to audio cues and dodge or roll, which is great. I love that kind of depth. Overall, Remnant from the Ashes gets a 7 out of 10. It's a fun, competent game that does what it does pretty well. There's a lot of replayability here, from the adventure mode system, the different bosses you can run into, and secondary campaign playthroughs. I like a lot of the added content where when you finish the game you can grind for new stuff and better equipment. All that is really fun, but I just feel like Remnant doesn't really do enough here. The bosses in particular are really lacking in this game. Some of them are very challenging, but there's a bunch in here that really just stick out as bad. In a game like this that's really emphasizing that kind of gameplay, it just feels like a huge disappointment and a missed opportunity. Overall though, I feel like Remnant does a pretty unique and interesting take. A lot of the Dark Souls kind of games that kind of take that style of gameplay really don't feel like they match up, but this game takes a unique style, kind of taking something like a Division style of gameplay and Dark Souls and kind of merging them in fun, interesting ways. And so Remnant gets that 7 out of 10. I'd recommend it, especially if it's on sale. I wouldn't say pay this game for a full price. I don't think it's really worth that. but if it's definitely on sale, then pick it up.